Welcome to That Career Coach podcast. Today, we are speaking with Tiffany Uman about how to bring confidence to the workplace, to your career. She has been a career strategy coach for over 3 years and had an incredibly successful 13 years in the corporate world. She got 7 promotions in 10 years. She worked at L'Oreal. She is like a fabulous content for us to have on our show. We're really excited about it. So, Tiffany, thanks for coming on the call. We appreciate it.
Oh, thanks, Kendall. I'm really excited to join you today.
We always try to be tactical. We try to give good advice, but I'd love to hear a little bit about just how did you get started in career coaching? What did that journey look like for you?
Oh, yeah. You're speaking to my heart right now, Kendall, because honestly, it's a lot of what I experienced in the workplace that inspired me to become a career strategy coach. I'm actually a marketing background by profession, but I've always had so much joy and passion in growing my teams to succeed. I had a very fruitful career path. My teams had as well, and that was the part that brought me the most excitement in my work. And I sort of had this urge inside of me of being able to do that on a bigger scale. And so that's where the seed started planting in my mind of, hey, you know what? Maybe there's something here. Maybe I can actually help people accelerate their career growth, take control of their career, really become that top 1% without the struggle of figuring it out on their own, because there's a lot of things that we never learn in school. I'm sure you totally feel me on this, Kendall, of, just these blind spots. And then here we are left to figure it out on our own. And I've certainly made a lot of those mistakes and struggles myself. So it was really coming from that place of wanting to give back in this next phase of my own career. And that's what kind of led me to becoming a career strategy coach, very much focused on accelerating, what do you actually do in your jobs that's going to set you apart and really position you for the most success. And it's been a great journey so far, very, very enriching, the most rewarding work that I've ever been able to do. So I'm really grateful that I get to call this my job.
Yeah, and that's amazing. I often say, I'm a passion-driven coach, so I always try to guide people to what's going to fill you up, what's going to make you feel satisfied. And one of my big passions is that coaching, mentoring, growing, developing people, right? So I have a very similar journey to yours in that had a lot of success in my career, a lot of it, some of it accidental, a lot of it despite making some of those mistakes that you touched on, and then just felt like I needed to fuel that passion, that interaction with more people and help them kind of find their way. So I love hearing, the similarities in kind of our journeys and how you got into the space.
Oh,
so
likewise.
You talk a lot about career strategy on your page, and I'm really intrigued by that vernacular of your career doesn't just happen to you. It's a strategy that you lead. Can you kind of touch on that a little bit and kind of what that looks like for you and your clients?
Oh, absolutely. I'm a huge advocate, Kendall, of proactivity. I never want things to just wait to happen. We need to make them happen. And as much as we might feel as professionals that there's a lot of things out of our control, believe it or not, there's actually a lot of things that are in your control. Yeah. You just need to know what to do and how to do it most effectively so that you can make the magic happen. And so that's where I really try to come from. And I love that you said earlier that you're all about, the tactical tips and really practical advice, because that's what it's about. And, it's not about staying up here with theory of does that work, does that not work? Everything that I share has been tried, tested, and proven by myself, my teams, my clients. And I love bringing that forward because when you're taking that proactive effort of really seeing how can you position yourself best, and there's a lot of facets that go into it, but it's this underlying really notion of taking control of your own career because no one else is going to do that for you. And I never want anyone to go, years down the line and look back and be like, oh, shoot, I really wish I would have done this, or maybe if I were to have done X, Y, Z, things would have been different. I don't want people to come from a place of regret. I want them to know that they're doing everything that they can to live a really fulfilling and passion-driven career, like you've mentioned.
Yeah. And it is so interesting. I had posted a video on social media yesterday about the responsibility that you have with your own career.
Yes, I saw that one. And I love that one.
There are always situations that arise that are out of our control. Right. I'm a big believer, do what you can, leave the stuff you can't to God, right? There's only so much that we have control over, but where you can, you have that responsibility to yourself, to your family, to your friends, to take control of your career, right? Yeah. No matter what that looks like. That doesn't always mean becoming a CEO, right? That's not always the end goal, but for what is going to make you fulfilled and make you satisfied, how do you get yourself there? And what is that strategy? And so I think it is important. I think so many people think if I'm just good at my job, my boss will notice and they will promote me.
No, I know. It's like you just want to shake them in their tracks and be like, that's so much more than that. I know. I used to believe that too. I was that one that was like, oh, I just got to work hard and everything's going to fall into place. And honestly, school kind of trains us to think that way, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's how we progress in our schooling. We do well, we get good grades, we get those kind of measurements of success. And so we come into the workplace thinking, well, hey, it's going to be really a lot founded around my performance. And it's not that that performance is not important, but it's certainly not the most pivotal of decision-making factors in your progression.
Yeah. And I feel like nobody teaches you that, to your point, right? School it teaches you just do your best, get the A, and that will determine what's on your report card. And sometimes performance reviews work that way, but more often promotions don't. And so, I talk on my page a lot about the game, right?
Yes.
The corporate, behind the scenes, behind the curtain game. I'd love to get your take on, what are some things that you have found successful in showing up confidently to the game and showing up to your career intentionally rather than kind of letting it happen to you on accident?
Oh, yeah. I would say so much of it comes down to the soft skills. Like you said it so well, Kendall, school doesn't teach us this. Obviously, it focuses a lot on the hard skills or the technical skills. And depending what kind of function you're in, that can be very important, right? If it's a very technically driven type of role or function. But when you're in the workplace, there's a lot of facets beyond the work and the nature of the work that play into playing that game. And I think it's very, that common term that we hear a lot. And I always want people to feel that you can do this really authentically. Like it doesn't have to feel icky. It doesn't have to feel like you have to play the politics. And maybe there are certain organizations that are a lot about that. I know I've certainly dealt with that in my career. But I really embrace the approach of how can you show up authentically and make sure that you don't have to change who you are in a workplace to succeed there. If you do, that's not the right workplace for you. Like I'll say that right now, it's not going to lead to sustainable success. So you want to be able to find that organization that will allow you to show up as your best self authentically and genuinely, but still be cognizant of these factors that play a role, whether it's, the relationship side of things, the communication side of things, being able to speak up and show your worth at all different occasions of your career. Like those are just a few things top of mind, but we could definitely dive deeper in like the confidence building aspects, because I think that's a big one in being able to show up in the best way possible day in and day out that will lead to the tangible results that you're looking to achieve in your career.
Yeah. And that's definitely a common misconception, I feel, that to play the game, you become almost the car salesman version of yourself. Not to diss car salesmen. I've worked with many a great one, but in general.
I get what you're saying, yeah.
And I think that you feel like you have to pretend to be somebody else. And one of the things that I often think about is for you, finding the right company to be successful at is more about finding the right skill alignment. What skills do you bring, and then does the company value them so that you're not having to bring a fake, inauthentic version of yourself to that workplace in order to be successful in your space, right? Yeah. And, you talk so much about confidence, and I love that, especially for women. There was an interesting study done, and it showed that until the age of 40, men are by and far more successful at leadership than women. And at the age of 40, it flips, and women become more successful than men. But the number one indicator of why that study found that result was men are more confident in their 20s and their 30s than women are. And the women who are more confident early on are just as successful as the men. It's just that on the whole, there's less confidence. So I'd love to hear from you, how do you show up confidently at work and in your authentic self to be successful in your career?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, this is so, so important. I love that you brought that stat forward. I mean, it kind of hits you in the gut when you hear that, right? Yeah. Like, oh my goodness. We hear about gender gaps and pay gaps, and it's like, as much as we want to keep making strides in that, and we are, there's still so much room to go. And that's why I'm really, really passionate about helping professionals, but yes, especially professional women, feel their most confident selves so that we can bring that out a lot sooner in their career.
Absolutely.
That will have like a compounding exponential effect on the success that they have and the leadership capabilities that they're building. So I would say for sure, like one of the big things in showing up confident is create your lane for success. And what I mean by this is don't compare yourself to others. I know I certainly fell into that comparison trap way too many times, especially in the early stages of my career. And it was such a distraction because it leads you to psych yourself out, leads you to think you're not doing enough. It leads you to wonder if you're, putting your energy in the right places. And especially if you're in a company culture, and I certainly was in one of these, where you're just surrounded by such impressive people. Like everyone is a star talent, right? So it's like, you start really questioning, do you have what it takes? Is it something that you're going to be able to compete with? And then that can create a really negative ripple effect in actually how you show up, in the actions that you take, or even the inaction that you end up taking because you start overthinking things too much. And so when I talk about like creating this lane for success, there is some positives to comparing, but we need to be really conscious of how we're doing that. If you're comparing in a way that is very inspirational of like, hey, maybe it's someone that's a few steps ahead of you in what you want to achieve. And you're like, hey, if they can do it, I can do it. Or just flipping that narrative of what you're telling yourself and using it as fuel to get you on the right track, close gaps to making those next steps in your career. That's going to be a lot more favorable than using it as something that's going to directly diminish your confidence and make you believe that you're not worthy, that you have to doubt your value that you bring forward, because that is going to be your biggest detriment in showing up as your most confident self in the workplace.
Yeah. And that is so true. And you see this so often that, well, would they be better at this? Or, well, I don't want to present. So especially in presentations, for some reason, I feel like I see that so often with executives, that junior talent's like, well, I'm not ready for that, or I don't feel confident doing that, or so-and-so is better at that. And that's a slippery slope to slowing down your own growth and your own progression, because that lean in and that, well, if they can do it, I can learn to do it, is such a better flip on that mentality. I think it's something that, we need to hear, we need to be reminded of for sure.
Absolutely. I love that you talked about like the feeling ready piece. I think that's one of those biggest roadblocks, Kendall, where, I don't know that I feel ready. I don't think I'm ready. And ready is such an interesting term, because I ask my clients this a lot, when they share that feedback. They're like, I want to do this, but I just don't know that I'm ready yet. And I stop them in their tracks. I'm like, well, what will ready look like for you? Like, really, like, what will ready look like for you? And so often it's our own narrative that's talking ourselves out of things instead of talking ourselves into things. And that is a very conscious shift that we need to make from a confidence and mindset standpoint. But once you break through that and you learn, and I think we could both relate to this, that you learn that you're never fully going to be ready for those next steps. You're always going to feel a little bit uncertain going into another stage of growth, but that's a sign that you're pushing yourself in the right direction. And kind of feeling at peace with that, it's going to unlock a lot more opportunity than letting the I'm not sure if I'm ready narrative keep you in your comfort zone and not really pushing the limits.
And that's why so many people, I feel, when you apply for new jobs, it's a lateral change, or when your boss asks what your goals are, it's less tangible, less tactical. And something I always encourage my clients to do is if you're expecting to get promoted in a certain time period, your boss should know that.
Oh, yeah.
And
if they don't know that, be explicit.
And if they don't know that, they're not working on it. I promise, right?
Yeah.
And it's not because they don't love you or think you're great, but it's because they don't understand that there is a timeline expectation for your growth. And it becomes so important that you should always be challenging yourself. That's why they say you should only apply to jobs where you have 60% of the qualifications. If you have 100%, you're overqualified, right? You've already done that job. Yeah. And so when you think of that, of progressing and growing your career, of getting to the next step, what are some things that your clients and my clients and our listeners can do to help them get that awareness and get to that next step?
Oh, yeah. It leads really nicely into one of the other things I wanted to share, which is really about owning your wins and self-advocating. Yes. You are going to be very stifled in your career if you don't do this and do this well. I mean, this is essential, right? You talked about that comparison earlier between professional males and females by the age of 40 and that pretty drastic shift in leadership. And I see it a lot, unfortunately so, where these incredible, talented female professionals are far too modest, are not taking enough ownership in highlighting their work. They're taking ownership in their work. They're doing the work really, really well, but they are not highlighting it. They are not finding strategic opportunities to get exposure and visibility for that work. They're not letting their manager truly in on maybe like the complexity that they're managing, what the process that allowed them to get to a final outcome. They're just doing the work and hoping that people will recognize it. And so owning your wins and feeling really confident with that is key. And I'll give a really tangible tip that I think is going to help our listeners. It's probably one of my favorite questions that really help me and my clients to just see things differently in owning our wins, especially if you're working with teams. Maybe you have a team, maybe you're working with people sort of laterally or peer-to-peer. But really ask yourself this one question: what wouldn't have happened if I wasn't there?
Yeah.
So what wouldn't have happened if I wasn't there?
That's a great one.
It's really going to help you distinguish very quickly what you've done versus what others have done to know, okay, these are the things that I need to start emphasizing as my own and feel really confident in showcasing that. And it's not about discounting the team, because we all, often, unless you're working in a really autonomous role, there's going to be elements of team collaboration in all of this. But you need to be really, really certain of how you showcase what you've done, because that's the value that you're bringing. That's the value that's going to lead to your next steps. That's the value that's going to play into your salary negotiations, right? So if we're being too shy and too modest and reserved, it's likely going to fall flat. And so being your own biggest advocate is likely number one takeaway that I want our listeners to have right now, walking out of this episode of, okay, I need to do this. I need to do this better, or I need to do more of this that's going to help me in my next steps.
Absolutely 100% agree with that. And I think especially with junior individuals, right? Even up until middle management.
Yeah.
There is this belief that my work will speak for itself.
Yeah.
It doesn't, right? If a tree falls in the forest and no one is around to see it, did it fall? Yes. But somebody has to go look to know that that's true, right? And the same is true with your work. If you're doing this work and you're doing it in a silo and you're doing it quietly, that's not a bad thing, but it's not a progressing self-advocacy thing. It's not going to help you get to your goals. Yeah. And I had a leader once who I really liked, really respected. He and I worked really well together. And he gave me twofold feedback that I have carried with me my entire career. He said, the hardest thing about being your manager is giving you enough work. And the hardest thing about being your advocate is convincing other people that the work you did was as hard as it was. And he was like, you do a lot and you make it look easy. And so everybody thinks it is. He's like, one of my hardest jobs managing you is how do I convince them that the work you did was hard?
Oh, yeah.
And I was like,
love that.
Oh, I had not even considered that. And in an effort to try to be a people pleaser and a good team member and a team player, you asked for it. I said yes. I got it done, and I never complained. And not that you should be complaining in your work, but that doesn't mean that you can't expound on, hey, here's what it took to deliver that.
Oh, 100%.
We worked with these teams. We interacted with these groups. We built out these results, and it drove this impact. And I hadn't been doing that latter part. I had just been doing the work. And how much more work was it for my boss to then go back and try to build that story for everybody else to advocate for me? Yeah. And that mentality shift that it's great to be good at your job. But if you are good at your job, people come to expect that. So how do you communicate the effort and the value? Why is this important to the company? To your point, what would not have happened if I was not here?
Exactly. Oh, so good, Kendall. Even that's like a great opportunity to integrate your strengths, like what really sets you apart in being able to do that so seamlessly, because maybe other people would probably struggle with what you've done. And for you, it's become second nature, but that's because of skills and capabilities that you've built to get it to that point. And you reminded me of something really important, I think, that your boss was touching on, which is even like that perception factor of other people, right? That they might think, oh my gosh, like Kendall's like got this, like she's handling things so easily. But it's like Yeah, but if that's the perception that they have, that's probably not the perception that you want them to have. So you're like, actually, no, I'm doing like a lot of things. I'm really like managing this, and I'm dealing with so many different stakeholders, and I've overcome XYZ challenges, and they won't know that otherwise. So it's such an important part of self-advocacy to be able to have that kind of perspective of other people's perceptions so that you can be in better control of that as well.
And I think the great irony of it all, and I apologize, the conversation that I had with him was that 2 weeks after that conversation, I had almost a complete mental breakdown because I was burning myself out, working 100-hour weeks, killing myself to deliver things, and everybody thought it was easy. And then we had a big team offsite event that was a half day, and I came into work and was like, I cannot go.
Yeah.
And he was like, this is the most important meeting of the year. I was like, I understand that. But I have 17 things that you have asked done by end of day today that cannot be done if I go.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, why don't you talk me through what those are and which ones are the most difficult, and let's deprioritize some things. And it was the first time ever I'd had that conversation.
Oh, yeah.
You don't have to do everything. We just keep giving it to you because you can. Doesn't mean you have to.
Oh, yeah.
What are we going to drop? What are we going to prioritize? What's most impactful? What's most important?
It's huge.
And so it was like 2 weeks of career advice, like drinking out of a fire hydrant, right? That like
just puts you into perspective. Yes.
Right? You have to communicate to people how hard the work you're doing is. You have to communicate to people the value of the work. You have to be able to prioritize, reprioritize, deprioritize to add the most impact. And you have to have open communication with your manager, because as amazing as my boss was, as you can tell from all these conversations, he had no idea.
Yeah. They don't know.
Because he just thought I was working really well. And I was like, oh no, I am this close to not showing up to work Monday. Like I am right on the burnout bridge.
Oh yeah.
And so luckily I had a really great, really proactive, leaned in leader, but so often that's not the case. And even when it is the case, he just didn't know. So it is so important, to your point of what are your strengths? What are the value? What are you adding?
Yeah.
And who needs to know that?
Yeah. Never let anybody assume things of you. I have a very similar example, actually, that was a very marked feedback moment for me in my career with one of my bosses. It was one of my better bosses that I had. And we were in like a touch point setting, not an official review, but a kind of a touch point. And I was giving her updates on the work that I was doing. And she stopped me and she said, Tiffany, like, I get a sense of what you're doing because I'm your manager, and luckily I get to see, how much you're putting into this and how you're, leading your team and XYZ. But, you're missing a lot of the details that I want other people to know. And I want you to be able to already start doing that because, well, one, I won't be your manager forever. And two, this is something that's really going to help build that external advocacy as well beyond just you and your team. And that was a real light bulb moment for me because it helped me understand, okay, it's true. I need to share more and the right details to not take for granted that people just know what I'm doing. And two, I probably need to be a little bit more explicit around the process to get to a certain outcome versus just jumping right into what ended up happening, because that misses the whole part around those abilities that can help you get to that next level. So if you're not showcasing that enough, and that was a bit of that trap that I was falling into, and luckily at the time my boss kind of called me out on it, and I was like, whoa, okay, you know what, that's something that I really should be keeping in mind better. And it just really changed my way of working and operating from that moment forward, and was a real aha moment that I think I needed at that time in my career.
Yeah, with my clients, I work in tool sets, and the tool that we call that is the roadshow, right? How do you roadshow to your stakeholders and convince them not only that you've done great work, but that it was valuable, that you brought your strengths out, that it showcases why you're good at your job, and the next level up, it's that roadshow, right? That you have to go on. And sometimes you have pre-existing infrastructure for that, right? Maybe you have a steerco or a standing meeting with a bunch of stakeholders. But where you don't, you got to make that happen, right? People 100%. Need to know. And so 100%. I think when you start to transition in that space from, hey, now I'm executing work, now I'm managing a team, now I'm building out these examples of value and impacts, and I'm creating relationships with stakeholders, you start to move into that more senior leadership, executive or executive adjacent types of roles. And that's where I feel like a lot of people get stuck, right? There's a lot of that, okay, I can do the work, I can tell you why the work is good. Can I lead the strategy behind the work? And we start to see some of that hesitancy set in, like, am I ready for the next level? Or the flip side, convincing your boss that you are ready for that level. So what's some of your advice when you start coming up against those points where maybe you feel you can't do the work, or back to our earlier conversation, like you don't feel ready? What does that look like?
Yeah. I think that echoes a lot of, even imposter syndrome kicking in those moments where you feel like way out of your comfort zone, or even like a fraud in taking on this next level role because you haven't necessarily done that before in that capacity.
Yeah.
And so you don't even feel like the rightful person to be in that position. You could even have been receiving that position. You could have gotten the promotion and you're in it, and you're still, facing that imposter syndrome of being like, are they sure they gave this to the right person? And it's starting to get into your head too much. But you said it so well earlier, Kendall, even like any new role, if you're already meeting 100% of the requirements, you're lowballing yourself. Like, you got to shoot higher. You've got to aim higher. And so the same thing is here. If you're going into any next level of seniority feeling, I've got this, like, I've got this in the bag. And don't get me wrong, many male professionals will go in with that kind of energy comparative to some of the female professionals that I've coached and that I've seen in my own career. But all that said, it's not atypical to go into these types of levels of seniority and feel like you're out of your depths. Yeah. It's a sign that you're moving in the right direction and tapping back into what got you there. Even reminding yourself of moments that you once were in a role that you didn't know as much, and you worked through it and you grew and you evolved. Using our own selves as our own benchmark of progression is a great tool to remind and reinforce that, okay, yeah, this is going to be challenging. This is going to be new. I won't know all the answers, and you don't have to know all the answers. I did a post recently on my page around that even the greatest CEOs don't have all the answers. And one of mine at the time made this statement like publicly in one of our meetings, and it just really hit me. And he was like, I intentionally hire people around me who are way smarter than me in different areas, because like that, I'm going to be able to make sure that we've got the right people driving the different business units of the company, and we can complement and bring like a much more holistic perspective in moving the business forward. And I think as, either in younger employees or younger professionals, we see these, C-level executives knowing everything and feeling like they possibly have all of the tool sets that they need. But in reality, a great leader knows that they don't have to have all the answers. You have to lean on the right resources and inspire and enable them to support you best, and vice versa. And that's where that imposter syndrome can really help be overcome, by recognizing that you were in this role for a reason. There is something that you've done up to this point that led those decision makers to bring you there. And you don't want to lose sight of that the moment you're in the role. This is your time to double down on that and build up on those strengths, while also really nurturing the right relationships that will maybe fill in some of those gap areas until you feel like you're mastering them yourself.
Yeah. And something that I have talked about with executive leaders and a lot of my clients is that inner versus outer voice. Right? Your inner voice sometimes is like, I just don't know. And your outer voice says, I'd be happy to look into that for you. Right? And there is that, you're not always going to feel 1,000% confident about every move that you make in your life. Right? That expectation would be unrealistic. Yeah. But you have to have trust in yourself. And that's where I think I see a lot of breakdowns. Like, do you trust yourself enough to go for it? To try it, to ask the questions, to lean on your resources, because you have gotten you this far, right? We talked about earlier, you have responsibility for your own career. You may have had great leaders or great bosses or great sponsors who supported you, who guided you, but you did the work to get you to this level, and you can keep doing it, right? And I don't know if you feel this way. I always use a personal example. Like, the first time I ever did a big speaking engagement, I was like, you want me to tell 500 people what to do? Are you sure? Like, am I qualified? And I had a conversation with my husband, and he's like, is this not your job? Have you not built up enough knowledge and skills to have been recruited to run this event? And I was like, well, when you put it that way, yes. And he's like, great. So you'll just do what you always do, and you'll be great. And I was like, well, that makes my insecurity sound really juvenile. Thank you for that perspective. But it's true where like even the people who you look at, you know, Steve Jobs, how many times did he fail at businesses? Bill Gates is not his, you know, Microsoft is not his first business. You have all these CEOs, founders, leaders. They fail a lot.
Yeah.
And it takes finding that right fit, that right supporting resource, that right structure to be successul. But confidence and trust in yourself, that's what really is going to help you transcend that.
This is so good. You know, you just made me think also of this notion of failure. I think it's an important one. And so often, I think with the world of social media too, I mean, it's constantly seeing people's highlights, right? Whether it's on a LinkedIn, on an Instagram, anywhere we really look, it feels like everyone's just shouting from the rooftops how amazing my life is right now. And obviously, it's a natural human instinct to speak more of the positive than really dwell on the negative. But at the same time, guaranteed, one, that's not always the full picture. And two, there's more that's happened to that individual to get them to that point that they're not even sharing. So we're only getting like a fraction of that pie when we see that. And it goes with, you know, internal corporate dynamics and all of this too, where when it comes with confidence, you know, knowing that what got someone to that end goal, there was a whole lot of struggle, probably obstacle, challenge that they just haven't really spoken about very much, but they pushed through and they got there, right? And so always kind of keep that perspective handy. If you're feeling, you know, am I cut out for this? Am I ready? You know, well, you better be ready, because there's never going to be a moment that you're fully going to be ready for anything, but you don't want that to limit you. You don't want that imposter syndrome to take over and let you feel like, you know, I'm not able to show up as my best self in this role. Yeah, maybe you'll fail at a few things. Maybe you'll make some mistakes, but it's really how you respond to those situations that shows a strength of character than actually the failure or mistake itself. And that is a really important mindset shift again of how do you actually bounce back? How do you show that resiliency? How are you going to move forward from a challenge that you're facing and show that it's not something that's going to hold you back or your team is back, but will be a learning opportunity more than anything.
Yeah. And something I talk with clients is you never see a CEO panic.
Yeah.
Right? They may be panicking, but like outwardly, with the exception of like cinematography and a few choice movies, CEOs don't really panic. Like they don't start throwing things to scream freak. And if yours does, by the way,
probably get out now.
You probably change companies. It's just like a nice recommendation. But generally, your C-suite is cool, calm, and collected at all things. And they should be, because how they respond to a failure, to a setback, to a change is what makes them qualified to be that leader. Yeah. Right? My team that I manage is made up of really great, strong individuals, right? And I had one of them come to me and say, you know, I'm nervous about this. I'm a little bit insecure about this. It's like, you know, you're never scared of anything. How do you do that? I was like, oh no, I'm scared of stuff all the time. Yeah. But my job as your leader is to protect you from that. Yeah. My job as your leader is to bolster you with confidence, with support, with trust. It is not for me to come to you and lay out all of my own insecurities and concerns in front of you, whether that's about the company or a project. My job is to do my job well. And if I have concerns, I'm going to take them upward. Yeah. And to you guys, my job is to support and grow you. And it's something I coach my leadership clients a lot on, like, please don't offload on your teams. They have enough going on.
You've got enough going on. Yourself.
But it doesn't mean that the leaders and the people you work with aren't nervous. Doesn't mean that they don't have concerns. But the way they handle that, to your point, that's what helps them get to that level, is can they continue on a strategy when they face a setback? Can they continue inspiring their team towards a purpose and a goal despite a hiccup? And that's what gets them there. And that's what
most definitely
you're striving for as you get to that level as well.
Yeah, that's bang on. You know, when you're that leader, you're going to feel probably really nervous in some of these situations, but being able to really lead by example in those moments, You know, I tell my clients this all the time. Like, you're gonna fall into a lot of tricky situations in your workplace. And it's not even so much about the situation, you know, whether you're leading your team or you're part of the team, how you bounce back, how you move forward from this is going to just be such a better indicator of your professionalism and the maturity that you're bringing in your role than falling into panic mode. That's probably not going to help anything. Yeah. And there's been many a time when I was leading my teams and what I, you know, inspire in my coaching philosophy of, you know, don't be scared to get your hands dirty. Like, don't never be above the work. Like, always show that you're a team, that you can lead by example, that you can defend them, that you can help shelter them in certain ways, but also help them see how you push through obstacles with composure and calmness and stability of focus, so that they can be inspired to be like, wow, I can do that too. And like, this is a case in point example happening right in front of me. Tiffany's doing this right now. And like, if she can do that, I'm witnessing this. And I think it's great to show that, you know, whether in our work as coaches of leading by example and speaking from that firsthand experience of, hey, this is possible. Bringing panic and stress and anxiety into already crisis management is not going to work. One of the things, and it goes back to what I said earlier, Kendall, about being proactive in your career, a lot of it comes to dealing with leadership and becoming an effective leader and anticipating challenge, right? You don't want to be in a crisis and in that moment be like, oh my gosh, what do we need to do? How do we do this? What do we need to take away? What do we need to fix? You're already too late in the game. You want to almost use the good moments where there is no challenge to already prepare yourself and your team so that when challenge comes, not everything goes into shambles, but you're able to stay composed as a team, come together, and actually move forward that challenge a lot more effectively.
Yeah. And Tiffany, that is so spot on. And I often refer, you know, the quote, those who can't do, teach. Yeah. Right. So it's more those who can't do, manage, those who can do, coach. Right. How do you coach and grow your team and build that stability so that in the face of challenge, you're prepared and you're strong? And, you know, same applies to us. Like to believe we can do, therefore we coach. And it's such an interesting perspective to hear all these stories and say, well, I have experienced that. And yes, that is an issue that happens, and get that relatability. And sometimes you just want to hear from somebody else. You're not crazy. This is okay.
You're not alone.
And you're going to get through
You're not alone. I say that a lot. I never want anyone to feel alone in their career, because so much of what any of our listeners are experiencing, guaranteed, there are a lot of other people going through exactly what you're going through right now. And so know that you're not alone. You have people like Kendall and myself who are there to support and help, of course, but please know that you're not alone. You don't have to be alone in your career. Why should you? When there's resources that can really guide you in the best next steps.
Yeah. So Tiffany, it has been wonderful having you on the podcast. This conversation was stellar. I feel like we got to touch on so many good tactical tips for our listeners to take away and start applying in their own careers. So thank you so much for being with us, and we will definitely have you back on in the future.
Thank you so much, Kendall. This was so much fun, and I can't wait to do it again soon.
Yeah, thanks.
Bye.